Behaviors that seem to come up the most would be like anxiety, aggression, the suicide ideation, intrusive thoughts, the fidgeting and the hyperactivity. There are still some kiddos that are presenting with ADHD behaviors who don't really have ADHD, and these food dyes can completely drive that. For our son, red 40 completely drives the ADHD type behaviors. Is the red 40, the yellow 5, the blue 1. They are petroleum based. So they were originally made with coal tar, they're made with petroleum. So those have a completely different structure and have a different reaction in the body.
I look around me and I see so many kids suffering their own behaviors,
Yeah.
parents
Yes.
suffering, and the schools. And we have not a good prognosis if we look at our teenage rate of mental health crises on the books.
Hmm.
And so then I say as a parent, wait a second, why should I be buying in to what is generally being sold in convention? What is the most important message you would want parents to hear if their child is suffering their own behavior first and foremost?
Uh, a cou- Two things. One, yes, some behavior is typical, right? Like little kids will throw temper tantrums and because they don't have the ability to express their feelings or they don't have the words yet. And teenagers are going through some changes, but that does not excuse, and nor should we excuse their behaviors as typical or this is a pattern, this is good, they're going to grow out of this. I try to tell parents, step back, watch them objectively and see if this is consistent. If it's not consistent, then what is causing these inconsistencies? And two, look at what they're eating. When we noticed that there were some major inconsistencies with our son, we had to look at what he was eating because that is the biggest determinant in how our bodies function is what we're taking in. And yeah, the environment plays a role too. I mean, if they're in a very chaotic environment, it's not going to help. However, if some days they have these outbursts, but other days they don't, that is an inconsistency. And so what is causing that? And looking at what they're consuming is really important.
What we eat does get metabolized in our body. It is affecting our biochemistry, it's affecting our hormones, all kinds of things, and all of that affects our brain. I think we're so uneducated about that as a society. There's
But my focus is the synthetic food dyes and the effects that they can have on kids and adults. But yeah,
And
that's
what
my area.
kinds of behaviors would have you seen now that you've researched your own kid, but over the years now you've heard and seen hundreds, maybe thousands of stories?
Oh, tens of thousands. Yeah, I have heard from a lot of parents. I've heard from a lot of kids. Behaviors that seem to come up the most would be like anxiety, aggression, the suicide ideation, intrusive thoughts, um, the inability to sit still, a lot of like the ADHD type behaviors that we look at, the fidgeting and the hyperactivity, but not all the time. So, like, kiddos who have ADHD, this is how they are all the time. Yeah, there may be some intensities. We also have some correlational evidence that ADHD and autistic individuals, those on the spectrum, seem to react more strongly to some synthetic dyes. Removing them doesn't remove the ADHD or, the spectrum disorders because they're neurobehavioral. I mean, they are part of how they're wired, right? However, there are still some kiddos that are presenting with ADHD behaviors who don't really have ADHD, and these food dyes can completely drive that. For our son, red 40 completely drives the ADHD type behaviors, the inability to sit still, the fidgeting, the blurting out, the brain buzzing, which isn't typical ADHD, but for him, it causes some other neurological issues. Uh, any kiddo that has behavioral issues, I would say, period. Um, Looking at what they're eating, looking at what's in their medications, if they're on medications, like I never say take them off of medications. That is definitely something you talk to your doctor with. However, if the medication has blue 1 or red 40 in it, talking to your doctor and getting a medication that has 0 synthetic colors in it, pharmacists can be very helpful with this. So finding one, going to several pharmacies. I have spent 5 hours trying to track down an antibiotic when my son was sick and needed it, to find one that didn't have colors in it, because most of the pharmacies had the same brand, and that brand, had color in it. So really investigating what it is that they are consuming. And then, I mean, there's a high correlation between children's food, synthetic food dyes, and sugar. So processed foods that have synthetic food dyes on average have 141% more sugar in them than other foods. So there is that correlation. Now, have we tested our son with just sugar? You bet. I can feed him a bunch of sugar and he never acts the way that he does when he's consuming food dyes. But the combination could also make it more difficult for kiddos. So really just investigating if you've got a kiddo, if you're an adult with anxiety or depression or bipolar, similar behaviors of bipolar, some mania, some depression, it is always helpful to look at what you're eating and to see if reducing or eliminating the synthetic food dyes, and we're talking red 40, yellow 5, so like a color and a number after it, eliminating those, if it lessens your symptoms or it helps them to completely go away. When I figured out a couple years ago that I was reacting to food dyes as well, I was only taking one medication for a metabolic disorder that I had been diagnosed with right after we figured out Alex was reacting to food dyes. And so I'd been on that medication for quite some time, about 10 years, and it always had color in it. And then I received it without color. It was naturally colored with iron oxides. And I watched my anxiety drop. And I also watched the 40 tabs in my brain go down to 5. Didn't eliminate a lot of the ADHD behaviors, but it lessened them severely. So, also, it turns out that I didn't even need the medication. The metabolic disorder disappeared once the food dyes were
That's
removed from my system.
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, two follow-up questions. Why do you think, so you're both a parent and your background is in science. So
Yeah.
you've gotten to come at this from both directions and spent years already invested in it. This is not new to you. Why do you think such a small amount, that's what I think is sometimes hard for parents to believe. It's just a drop or something, could have such an effect. And what about these natural iron oxide,
Mm.
caramel, the one that makes it white that's supposed to,
Titanium dioxide.
yes. So both of those. Why do we have to wonder about the more natural ones and scientifically, and why such a small amount could make such a huge difference?
Yeah. So that question is a little bit more complicated only because we have not done the research on what it even does to humans. We do know in rats and in mice that it can cause issues. We don't necessarily know how it causes issues. So, for example, the reds and yellows are called azo dyes. It's a class of dyes. It is how they're manufactured. It is their chemical structure. When they break down into metabolites. They can last in the system for 48 hours to 72 hours. We knew this 12 years ago when we started watching our son, that yellow took 5 days for it to eliminate the behaviors, took 2 days for red 40. When I was putting the book together, we found some research that supports it. Was like, yes, I'm right. The science supports that, yes, it can be detected in your urine for 72 hours yellow and 48 for red. We don't know how those metabolites are affecting our body. There is some unpublished research that had demonstrated that it binds to the macrophages in the brain. Macrophages are responsible for part of your immune system. So it can kind of render the immune system mute, I guess. We have, uh, we stumbled across, super long story, but we stumbled across a biotech company that's local. They have a product called Restore, and it is an all natural amino acid complex with herbs and things. It's designed to boost your immune system and is specifically in your brain. And if we get accidentally dosed with food dyes and we take it, it actually stops the reaction. So we are trying to get a couple researchers to look into, and we have one, my co-author, who is going to be looking into like what's the mechanism of this? How does this work? So we don't know how food dyes affect people. Some people can eat far more without a reaction. My son and I, unfortunately, my son for sure, extremely reactive, and some people are extremely reactive. Some people get hives. It 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 just interrupts a process in the body, and we're not quite sure what it is that's causing inflammation. Well, we do know that it causes inflammation,
Mm.
and it affects the gut system. So it causes inflammation, can cause colitis. Red 40 can cause colitis in mice and rats. So it does have a biological effect on the body. And then we don't know enough. I'm in neuroscience. We don't know enough about how the gut sends messages to the brain, what those messages are, and how that affects the brain. We do know that the gut bacteria are responsible for some of those messages and the balance and the configuration of your gut bacteria. We also know that there are specific gut bacteria that break down food dyes. So maybe those individuals have a higher percentage of those gut bacteria that break down the food dyes that then sends a larger signal to the brain. Like there's a lot of research that needs to be done, zero funding to do it. And it will be interesting along the way if we can get some more money for funding to find out how that mechanism works. But a lot of speculation, a lot of little pieces that we can put together, but we don't exactly know. Okay, so that was the first question. What was the second question? Sorry.
Oh, the dyes that would be considered natural, but
Oh,
are kind
yeah.
of they're not
Well,
pomegranate. They're not
so
a
so we
berry.
have yeah, we have natural, we have artificial, and we have synthetic.
I see.
So the natural would be like beet juice,
Turmeric.
turmeric, right? So the artificial, all synthetic dyes are artificial, but not all artificial are synthetic. What makes those synthetic dyes, the red 40, the yellow 5, the blue 1? They are petroleum based. So they were originally made with coal tar, they're made with petroleum. So those have a completely different structure and have a different reaction in the body. The um the artificial means they're made in a lab. They could start out natural. So when we hear caramel color, we think, oh, well, that's just sugar. And sure, it starts out with sugar, but then there's ammonia and there's ammonia and there's a couple other chemicals in the process, unless it's organic. Now there's an organic process for caramel color, and that is much more natural, but we still don't call it natural because it's made in a lab.
So it's
Annatto, yeah,
synthesized is what
yes,
that means.
right. But we don't, so in the food terms, synthetic means petroleum based, artificial means made in a lab. So yeah, the terminology can get confusing for some people. Titanium dioxide, iron oxides are considered more natural because they don't undergo quite as much in a lab. Annatto, I went down the annatto rabbit hole. Now, I will be honest, I am not a chem student. Chemistry is actually the reason why I didn't get my degree in biology and went the psychology route, and then ended up getting my biopsych degree in grad school. So chem got me, but from what I went down the rabbit hole, there's many different ways of processing annatto, and in the processing, there are higher concentrations of some chemicals or molecules than others. And it seems that some of them with these higher concentrations have a greater effect on individuals. Because I've heard from a lot of people they can't do annatto. Well, one, annatto is a seed, so some people are allergic to that type of, seeds, so they can't do it. But also, some of them seem to react to some annattos, but not others. The problem is that companies don't have to tell you which ones they're using. You have no way of knowing which ones they're using. And unless you really, really want to eat something and you contact the manufacturer and you get the company where they get the annatto from, and then you go down that rabbit hole of trying to figure out the chemical composition, like we don't know. So there's not enough information given to the consumer in order to be able to make these decisions. Same with, there's an allowable daily intake for synthetic food dyes. Red 40 has an allowable daily intake. However, where is it listed on any food products about how much? Like, so we're supposed to be eating a certain amount of sodium, a certain amount of sugar, a certain amount of carbs. And so those products are listed with the percentages and the grams and all of that. So we can then add that up. There's not anything like that for the synthetic colors or any of the colors actually, but the synthetic colors have an allowable daily intake, and yet we don't even know what everyone's eating unless you try to sit down and do the math, or a couple papers out there that break down some products but not others. I was speaking to a woman who was talking about titanium dioxide. They're investigating titanium dioxide, her and her team, and they found that some products have high levels of titanium dioxide, while others have low levels. We just don't know. We don't know how much of these colorants are added to any of these products. So yeah, some people react to annatto, some people react to the caramel color, but again, it's it's probably the chemicals that get added in the lab when they are processing it down. So yes, there are some things that still affect people outside of the synthetic food dyes.
Even
And
you saying, sorry to
no, go
interrupt.
ahead.
And even you saying there's an allowable daily intake, that must be FDA.
Yes.
Right. And so if there's an allowable daily intake, it makes me even feel more like a smokescreen because they don't have enough research, as you just said. There's not actually enough funding to understand this thing. So if it's not understood, how could they create allowable daily intake except to smokescreen that they don't want to be questioned too much about it or give it up?
Yes, and the allowable daily intakes were set back in the 80s or 70s. And those or maybe 60s or 70s, those numbers do not reflect what we're consuming today. I mean, last year, 5.3 million pounds of red 40 were batch tested and used in foods. To compare, red 3 is banned. A little over 140,000 pounds of red 3 was used, but 5.3 million pounds of red 40. And that's just red 40. They call it red 40 straight. It's a water soluble. Red 40 lake, which is oil soluble, there was another several million pounds. So we use far more now than we did back in the 70s and 80s. When we were writing the chapter on history, I mean, we go back to, how natural colors were used from the very beginning. Synthetic dyes it was invented by a gentleman in Europe, Sir Henry Perkins, for coloring fabric. I don't know who decided that should be in food, but it went into food. And from the moment that it went into food, there were problems. Some of it was contamination problems, which is why synthetic dyes have to be batch tested to make sure there's no other contaminants, because previous in the 1800s and 1900s especially, people were dying from the contaminants that were in there. There's a reason why red 40, there were iterations before that that didn't work. We were banning things back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Colors have been removed, new ones have been reintroduced. So synthetic colors have been problematic since the very beginning when they entered into the food supply. So colors period. As long as if they were natural, that's one thing. But as soon as humans tried to color food to make it look natural, we've had problems. So,
To
yes,
cycle back to the ADHD, because as you probably know, we have more than 50% of our kids getting diagnosed. I'm making that number up just on what I hear on the street. It's
yeah,
just all over the place. From your point of view as a neuroscientist, is there a different brain that is ADHD? This relates to what I'm going to ask you about dyes, but first of all, the premise. Is there a different brain that's an ADHD brain?
yes, yeah, yeah. ADHD is a thing. It is a neurotypical brain, meaning that it is, or neurotypical, meaning that it is different than typical. Hate using the word normal because normal
Well,
means
the bell
nothing.
curve, right?
Yeah, normal is a setting on your dryer. Every time I ask my students who feels normal, maybe one person raises their hand, which tells me that that's actually the outlier, not the norm. But they are wired different. It is a ADHD is really a dopamine dysregulation disorder. So they don't produce dopamine consistently or when needed, and therefore dopamine affects learning, attention, executive function. So the inability to sustain a task or to initiate a task. So sometimes individuals with ADHD just can't make that phone call. They need to make that phone call. They know they need to make that phone call. They will beat themselves up, but they just cannot do it. It is not a willpower thing. It is none of that. It is they do not have the neurotransmitters in the right places, in the right concentrations in order to be able to do the task, and they can't summon it by willpower. So there are individuals absolutely that have ADHD. Uh,
And then I even started looking up. So, what do you think of this? Could the artificial food dyes or other junky things we're eating, but let's focus on them,
uh-huh.
create a dysregulated dopamine?
Possibly. And that could be what is affecting those individuals that look like they have ADHD but don't, or individuals that do have ADHD who have already a dysregulated dopamine system, and then now we're consuming these food dyes that cause that dysregulation to just
To get
increase.
worse.
Yeah. So if you remove food dyes and other issues from the diet, you can put an ADHD kiddo on a very clean diet and they can still present with ADHD. So that demonstrates that there is an actual brain wiring for that.
Mhm.
The increase in identification of individuals with ADHD really does come down to when I was in school, they didn't test for it. They just, blamed it as character flaws, made us feel bad for the behaviors that we had. And then, now we have kiddos that are being tested for it all the time. And some of that is inaccurate and some of it is accurate. So some kiddos, I would, I can honestly say don't have ADHD, even though they have the behaviors, but because of what they're eating. I also will say there are absolutely kiddos out there that have ADHD, and the medication helps because it helps to regulate that dopamine so that it brings it to a baseline level that then they're able to initiate tasks. They're calmer, they can focus. So I believe that both can happen, and yet I think some of the kiddos are being misdiagnosed for sure.
Because they are being diagnosed by a symptom picture, right?
Correct. We only can look at behaviors. We can look at consistency of behaviors. We can look at consistency over time. We look at consistency over situations. So in school, at home, at friends' houses, all over. To get this big picture, to accurately diagnose ADHD takes at least 6 months, a lot of testing, various situations, reports from teachers, parents, friends, anybody that interacts with the child on a daily basis, and then a clinician can look at the big picture and say, yes, we have these consistencies. When there are these inconsistencies, Some of them are being missed. Some of them are being labeled as having ADHD, but probably don't. Or if they do, it is more mild and is just being exacerbated by what they're eating. Yeah.
And so the conclusion of that thought process for me is that it would it be important for parents to try this out because it is a
Yeah.
symptom, ADHD is a symptom picture, and you are saying it stands alone.
Mhm.
That can happen regardless of dyes, but we don't know if it's happening regardless of dyes unless we take them out.
Yep. I tell all parents that I talk to and anybody that will listen to me, um, give it 2 weeks. Pull dyes out of the kiddos and just pull it out of the family because if it's affecting them, it's going to be affecting probably someone else in the family. I was very, I don't know. I look back and go, well, my kiddo is super reactive. He and I have a very similar system. What made me think that I'm not reacting, right? But here I was at 52 going, well, I've always felt this way, so this is who I am, right? Yeah. So I tell all parents, pull it out of the family for just 2 weeks. Have a fun little experiment. Go through your house, put an X on everything that has food dyes in it. You can either box it up and put it in the garage or just don't touch it for 2 weeks. Look at toothpaste because that goes in your mouth, mouthwash, any medications, vitamins. There are some vitamins, some big name brand vitamins that have color in them. So look at everything that's going in or on your body. Clothing doesn't matter. That's dyes are used as pigments. Pigments are bound that don't get it's long story. Wash your clothes before you wear them from brand new, you're fine. But if it's going on your skin, I sprayed my son down with sunblock that had bronzer in it. Little did I realize, I didn't even look, had red, yellow, and blue in it. It will absorb through your skin. We do know there's bacteria on your skin that will break down those azo dyes as well, not just in your gut, but on your skin. Blue one is small enough to enter the blood-brain barrier, so it is definitely small enough to be absorbed by your skin. So everything on your skin, everything in your mouth, just remove it and see how you feel. Test it out for 2 weeks and see if any of those behaviors disappear, lessen, are people sleeping better? Are your thoughts clearer? Is there less rumination? There's a lot of things that can happen. One of the side effects for me is that the drive to people please disappeared. Such a strange one. Such a strange one. But that rumination of the conversation I had 6 months ago and thinking, oh my gosh, that person probably thinks I'm an idiot and I feel so awkward and da, 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 all that gone. I
Right.
love helping people and I will help people all day long, but it is not driven from I need to now. It is
Right.
not driven from that anxiety place anymore. It is a few things disappeared that were really weird. But I knew this in 5 days. I had a little mini existential crisis of like, oh my gosh, who am I?